Hey everybody, it's Grandmaster Ben Feingold here with another lecture, Great Players of the Present. Today's lecture is sponsored by the Wren Construction Company, LLC. Wren Construction, W-R-E-N. It's a construction company, obviously, that a couple guys specialize in full rehabs. They do kitchens, decks, landscaping, roofs, HVACs, plumbing, electrical, and foundations. And they sponsor this lecture. He didn't mention that was the most important thing that they do. So thanks, Wren Construction. That's W-R-E-N. It's sort of like Ben, but it's Wren. That's pretty similar. Today's lecture is on the Indian Grandmaster Dommaraju Gukesh, who from now on will be called Gukesh, because everybody calls him Gukesh. So now Anand is lucky because Anand has a nickname, Vishy. If he didn't have that nickname, he would be called Anand or Anand, because that's what he wants to be called. But Vishy caught on, so he couldn't stop Vishy. And Dommaraju doesn't have any nicknames, so he's Gukesh. So Gukesh, as you all know, I wish there was somebody here to tell me they didn't know. He's the third youngest Grandmaster of all time. And when he became a Grandmaster, he was almost the youngest, but he was 17 days older than Karyakin. And then since then, of course, that's been surpassed. So he's currently the third youngest of all time. And there's argument about whether he's the third youngest 2700 or not. Depends if you ask Magnus. The internets say he's third youngest, and Magnus is like, excuse me, I was younger when I passed 2700, rawr. So, okay, well, that doesn't really matter much. He's either the third or fourth youngest 2700 ever. And his dad is an ear, nose, and throat surgeon, and his mom is a microbiologist. So pretty successful family. He learned chess at the age of 7, and he's from and lives in Chennai, where most of the top, Indian players reside in Tamil Nadu. And he turned 2700 approximately 7 days ago from the airing, from this being live on Zoom. From YouTube, it'll be like 2-3 weeks ago, but you get the idea. And he surpassed 2,700 in a tournament that's going on right now in Biel, Switzerland. And in rounds 1 and round 3, he beat players of his own rating, pushing his rating above 2,700. And I have both of those games for you. All 3 games we're going to look at today are from 2022. If I show you games from 2015, 16, 17, he's only going to be 2,400. But now he's 2,700 only as of last week. I remember one of the first times I learned of Gukesh was a couple of years ago when he was on the cover of New in Chess magazine. And India has a lot of upcoming juniors that are going to be or have been 2,700, such as Pragnanandha and Nihal Saran. Those have been the 2 most famous Indian teenagers the last few years. So yeah, we have a question from the chat. Is the rating floor considered a super GM about 2,700? There's no official kind of thing about that. So I, personally for me, anybody who's over 2,700 is a super GM, because there's a lot of GMs between 2,400 and 2,600. I would say most GMs are between 2,400 and 2,600. So once you start getting past 2,650, then you're not kidding around. I mean, if you're 300 points higher rated than other GMs, there should be some kind of other, something. Yeah, something. I don't know what. Okay, and his Wikipedia is very small because he's 16. However, it's packed full of gold medals. So if you want to follow somebody, but you're very interested in whether they won gold medals or not, then this is the guy. This guy's won lots of gold medals. Under 9, under 12. He's won the World Youth. He's won the Asian Youth. He's won under this, under that. He wins all the junior tournaments, which isn't surprising. And again, his Wikipedia is not very long because he's only 16 and he just became 2,700. And one of the reasons it's not that long is he's from India, and lately India has a new grandmaster every 2 or 3 months. So they're always talking about the next big thing. However, those next big things didn't get to 2,700. So he's separating himself from the other Indian juniors, and he's also younger than Praggnanandhaa and Nihal Sarin. He's only 16. In fact, he turned 16 2 months ago. So he's barely 16. Okay, and I expect we'll see him in Olympiads representing India, and he'll be in the World Cup and so forth. And he'll be probably fighting for the World Championship either when he's 18 or 19 years old would be the most likely, I think, based on his progress over the last 3 or 4 years. Okay, let's do some different kind of sharing. Although my mom told me never to. No, she didn't tell me that. Let's share the chessboard. That seems better. Okay, now you can all see the chessboard. I hope.
Yes.
All right, good answer. Okay, so the first game we're going to look at is between Gukesh, who has white, and Johan Hjartarson in the Reykjavik Open, which was played in April this year. Now, as you all know, I need somebody here so I can say they don't know. But as you all know, Johan Hjartarson used to be a candidate for the World Championship before you were born. And he's probably in his 60s now, is my guess. Because I know he's older than me, and I'm in my 50s. So I was just guessing. And Hjartarson used to be 2650 FIDE when that was top 50 in the world. And now because he's older, he's only 2465 FIDE. But they played in round 8 of the Reykjavik Open pretty late in the tournament. I believe on board 4. So they were both doing quite well. Obviously, Gukesh is doing quite well. And his rating was 60 points less in April. So Gukesh is getting rating points all the time. Now, what I want you to focus on when you look at Gukesh's games, because you don't have to just watch my video, you can go to the internet or your database or chess.com or Lichess or the Sky or in your dreams, and you can find Gukesh games, and you can look at his games from 2021, 2022 and see, how strong he is now. But the one thing you should know from his games is he's uncompromising. He doesn't play slow, boring, drawish chess. Okay? He tries to win with white and he tries to win with black. And in fact, more than one of the games this stream is him winning with black. He doesn't play for a draw. He doesn't play for equality. He wants to mix it up. And obviously, if you're playing a teenager, especially for me, for example, you don't want to mix it up. You want it boring as possible. So Hjartarson is an older player. Gukesh was 15 when this game was played. And unfortunately for Hjartarson, didn't go the way that he wanted. Okay, so they started out with a Queen's Indian. The Queen's Indian's not played very much today, but when Hjartarson was a candidate and lost his match against Karpov, of all people, to lose the candidates, matches, Queen's Indian was very common. Okay, so G3, Bishop A6. That's actually a newish move from people playing the Queen's Indian in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. In the late 80s, early 90s, people started playing Bishop A6. Before that, they just played Bishop B7 and fianchettoed their bishop. So this is basically people aren't playing the Queen's Indian much anymore, and we're going to find out why. Okay, B3, Bishop B4 check. Bishop goes back to E7. The reason they play Bishop B4 check before Bishop E7 is to stop White from fianchettoing his bishop here. So usually White plays Bishop C3 and Knight D2, although he doesn't have to. But it's just a funny move order trick. Okay, he plays Knight C3, trying to prove I don't need my bishop on B2. D2 is good enough. D5 attacking the C pawn. They traded. bishop g2. And I think Hjartarson, out of the opening, has what he wants. It's sort of a strategical game, not very tactical. But as I've pointed out many times when I'm doing commentary, the opening of the game sometimes is the opposite of the middle game. Sometimes you have a boring opening, then you have a maniacal middle game. And conversely, you have a crazy opening where it's all opening prep and it dwindles down to some equal position. So right now it seems boring, but that means it's going to change. Okay, castles, bishop goes back to b7. It did its job on a6. Everybody's playing very solid. And finally, Gukesh goes forward. He wants to push in the center and the king side, and he's forcing Johan to make a decision. Do I take the knight on e5 and let white have that nice pawn there, or do I let that knight sit on e5? So, tough decision. He played rook e8, rook d1. Rook d1 prepares for the eventual knight trade. He wants this rook on the potentially half-open file. So he doesn't trade. He plays c6, solid. And e4. No playing solid for Gukesh. Gukesh wants to mix it up. Also, I'd like to point out that when you're an up-and-coming player, especially a very young player, most of your tournaments are open tournaments. And if you're American, almost all of your tournaments are open tournaments. World Open, Chicago Open, US Open, National Open, all kinds of open tournaments. And so in an open tournament, if it's 6 rounds and you have 3 wins and 3 draws, that's not good. If you're playing in a round robin where everybody's about the same rating and you have 3 wins and 3 draws, that's good. So open chess and playing lower rated players forces us to play more enterprising chess and not have half wins and half draws, which if some super GM was playing in super GM tournaments and they were getting 4 wins and 5 draws every tournament, they would take that in a heartbeat. But if you're playing an open tournament, 4 wins and 5 draws is no good. This is the Reykjavik Open. That means the top players are playing people who are 22, 23, 2400, so they have to win. You can't just win and draw and win the tournament like you could in a round robin. So you got to play enterprising chess, you have to be a good calculator, and you have to punish your lower rated opponents. Now, Hjartarson's an unusual opponent because he used to be top 30 in the world, and now his rating is, not good because he's older. So he has the potential, obviously, to play at a high level, but he's probably going to get exhausted at the end of a tournament. I'm exhausted in round 1. Okay, knight f8, defending his d-pawn some more with his queen. a3, stopping bishop b4 and preparing to move the queen side. It's probably not a move I would have thought of. Knight e6, the point of knight f8, attacking d4. Bishop to e3. Rook c8, very solid play by black. b4, Gukesh goes forward. That's what he does. Finally, he gives up and takes on e4, giving white an isolated pawn. But look at white's active pieces. And my good friend Gregory Kaidanov once said, people care too much about pawn structure and they don't care enough about active pieces. Okay, and he's right. White has an isolated pawn, but who cares? White's pieces are all really nice. White's rook on d1 is now properly placed, defending his isolated pawn, positioned against the queen. Knights are in the center. Bishop is open, unlike his friend on b7. Maybe that's his enemy. Okay, let's continue. Knight d5. Knight goes in the center. Bishop h3, activating the bishop even more. Bishop f6. Rook c1. Again, there's a lot of tension here. Nobody's done anything crazy yet. Rook c7, getting out of this pin for the moment, and potentially wants to play rook d7 later and fight against this isolated pawn. Bishop goes back to g2. Bishop goes back to e7, always retreat. Knight goes to c3. He wants to give black an isolated pawn. Black gets the 2 bishops, but at what price? Giving white this nice center. 2 pawns in the center and the open f-file and this nice knight on e5. And again, my bishop is better than your bishop. It's really clear the rook belongs on d1, we want to make sure black never plays c5 and tries to equalize because the rook is opposite the queen. So white has more space in the center. White has 2 pawns in the center to 0. Black has the 2 bishops, but those bishops don't look very good yet. Bishop g5 attacking the pawn, queen f2. Never play f6, giving the result of the game away. Terrible. Knight goes back to d3. Finally, he got the knight out of e5 and c5. So black decided, I'm passive. White has the center. White has more center pawns. I'm going to kick the knight out, and I'm finally going to play c5, and all my troubles are over. Except for one thing. d5, that pawn's defended too much. He takes on b4, attacking the knight on c3, takes back. Knight has to go to f8, there's no other square. Knight f4, it's clear c5 didn't work out very well because white has this really nice protected passed pawn. Also, you got to watch out for e6. Queen d6, blockading. The queen's not usually a good blockader. Now, this is where I said Gukesh is an uncompromising player. A lot of times, if I'm playing a grandmaster and they do something unorthodox, which gives me a chance to do something also unorthodox, I sort of believe them. I'm like, well, he let me do this, so probably I shouldn't do it, or he wouldn't have let me do it. Okay, but Gukesh doesn't do that. Gukesh likes to play aggressively and challenge his opponent, and he decided the queen was worth more than the 2 rooks here. Obviously, Hjartarson didn't think so, or he wouldn't have played queen d6. So white played the obvious knight b5, forking the queen and rook. Rook takes rook. And instead of taking back on c1, he takes the queen. And we recently saw this in a game that Richard Rapport lost to Jan Nepomniachtchi in a Petrov, where the queen was way better than the 2 rooks. He takes, always play bishop f1. And it's not just that the queen's better than the 2 rooks, which isn't necessarily the case here, but black has other issues. This knight's really good. This passed pawn's really good. This knight's passive. The king has an open diagonal here. Okay, and black probably thought he could escape with bishop a6, threatening the f1 bishop. Now we could trade everything. We could take on e8, and they take on f1, and we'll actually get a position with equal material. But white just played b5 because he liked his knight on d6. And now he's threatening the bishop, and he's threatening the rook. Rook d8 is forced. Excuse me. Queen c2, attacking the rook on d1. Probably this is the move Hjartarson overlooked when he played queen d6 and allowed this position to happen. He had to see up to here because his moves were forced. But now white's queen can go to c7. And black's pieces are still going to be under attack. His rook's under it. I mean, his bishop's under attack. His rook's under attack. And if he saves his rook, queen c7 defends the knight, attacks the rook, and attacks the bishop on b5 on a6. So he plays rook a1, queen b2. Could also have played queen c7, and I guess black can bail out with rook d7. Queen b2, rook a5, knight f5. The rook on a5 is sort of trapped. Bishop takes knight, stopping knight e6. And you can see here that this is really good for white. The rook on a5 is misplaced. The rooks are forked. He takes. And you can't take the pawn on d5, although you'd really like to, because here comes bishop c4, pinning whichever rook you put on d5. But if you don't take that pawn on d5, white steamrolls in the center. And this is exactly what Gukesh wants. This kind of sharp position, double-edged, material imbalance, not some boring positional game. That's not what Gukesh does. Okay, he doesn't take the pawn and give the exchange up. And we can see that white's pawns are very strong and black's pawns on the queen side are not. They're not going anywhere. So the game didn't last much longer. Bishop b5, trapping the rook. He takes the pawn, c7. moves the rook, queen b4 check, d6, f4 pawn didn't matter very much. Knight e6, bishop c4. And this was a cute finish if you like cute finishes. If you don't like cute finishes, well, why are you watching my lecture? He played rook c5, stopping all the pawns except for one thing. And while more than one move wins here, but Gukesh played the most pleasing. You got to please your audience. If you're already winning, you got to do something extra. And he just took the rook. You can't take with the knight because the knight's pinned. So you have to take with the pawn, and he still didn't take with the pawn. How does that sentence make any sense? He resigned. If you take with the pawn, d7. And almost pre-move c8 equals queen, even though they're playing over the board. So then white's going to be up at least a queen, probably more. So black didn't like this position, so he resigned after queen takes c5. So I can't wait for Gukesh to be 20, 21 years old if he's going to play better than this, because he's already beating, former candidates, and he's making the game very interesting, taking it out from a boring positional game to very exciting, pushing all of his center pawns, pushing his queenside pawns, and it comes to fruition. Very nice game. And this game was played just a few months ago when Gukesh was 15 and only 26-37. I wish I could only be 26-37. Okay, next game, we'll flip the board. Okay, this game was played about 10 days ago in Beale in round, is it 1 or 3? Either 1 or 3 against Laquan Lim. And I think this is the game that put him over 2,700. Laquan Lim been the best player in Vietnam for at least the last 8 years. And he's lived in St. Louis for quite a while. I'm not sure where he lives now. He was going to Webster University, and he was in St. Louis, and he would play tournaments in the US. Play a lot of tournaments in Missouri, in St. Louis. And I don't know if he's back in Vietnam or he lives somewhere else, but he's playing a lot of chess now that he's not a student at Webster, but I think he was the coach. In fact, he might still be the coach of the Webster kids. So maybe he still lives in St. Louis. Okay, I mean, who doesn't live in St. Louis? All right, so Laquan Lim is white, Gukesh is black, and they play an exchange queen's gambit, and he plays bishop to b4, transposing to a Ragozin system instead of c6 or bishop e7. h6. And I told you he was an uncompromising player, and you were probably writing an angry letter to the editor. I think Gukesh is a boring player, and he would never do anything untoward, and he would play really solid. Ben Feingold's crazy. Well, now we're going to see who's right. g5. Man, if my student played g5, I would tell them it's good if they won, but if they lost, I'd say, what are you doing? Okay, super aggressive line, and then knight e4. This is one of the points of bishop b4, is to play knight e4 as soon as possible. So, well, Gukesh is ruining his king side by playing h6, g5, but he doesn't care, he's playing aggressively. He's getting a lead in development, he's attacking, and he has the black pieces. That's how he plays. Now, some of you out there aren't 2,700, at least one of you, and you're probably wondering the last couple of moves, why doesn't queen a4 check win a bishop? And the answer is black plays knight c6 and defends his bishop. And that actually is a line. Sometimes white does play an early queen a4 and force the knight to c6. That's actually common in this variation. Okay, he played rook c1, defending his knight. And h5. He's not done attacking. He wants to trap that bishop on g3. He's thinking, I'll play h4, and if somebody moves one of their pawns so their bishop can escape, I can take and mess up the pawn structure. So h5, typical idea in this line. Never play f3. Oh man, I gave away the result again. Knight g3, hg. Now he plays c6. Now his queen can get out, he defends his d-pawn. Bishop d3, the players develop their pieces. G4, the pawn's pinned. H4. G3, the pawn's still pinned. Queen E7, threatening this pawn on E3. Also, if black is going to castle, I didn't say black was going to castle, but if black castles, there's some chance he'll castle queenside since he doesn't have any pawns in front of his king here, if he castles kingside. And if he is going to castle queenside, he's got to move his queen. So now at least black has the option, castle queenside, castle kingside, or just leave my king in the center. I'm not sure what white's going to do with his king. Now, when I say I'm not sure what he's going to do with his king, I've done deep analysis of these games, so I am sure what he's going to do with his king. And that's because I've already looked at the games. And this move surprised me. When I was playing the games over and analyzed them, I was like, whoa. And it's a good thing I have a nice, sturdy chair. I didn't fall out of my chair like some people. Yeah, in the World Blitz, who fell out of their chair? Somebody did. They were playing Petrosian, too. Yeah, some guy fell out of his chair at the Blitz tournament, and rightfully so. King to D2. He didn't like his king on the king side because all the pawns have moved, and he probably figured, I'll put my king on B1, always play king B1. I mean, I know Laquan Lim, we both lived in St. Louis. He knows always play king B1. Okay, defending his pawn. Knight B6, here comes the knight. It also unleashes the bishop on C8. A3, always retreat, attacking the G pawn. So they traded. F4, bishop D7. So maybe black is going to castle queenside, maybe. And this position looks totally bananas. I don't know who's better, and I don't know why. I don't understand what's going on. Pawn structure makes little sense. Black has the two bishops. Is the H4 pawn isolated or is it passed? It's both. I don't know if it's going to queen or he's going to lose it. Is the white king safe or the white king will never be safe? I don't know. All I know is that's Gukesh's type of position. He likes wild and crazy play, and I guess that's better than having black and playing a Berlin and groveling for a draw. That's not the way Gukesh does it. Okay, queen F3, defends the e-pawn some more. Long castle, finally he castled. F5, crushing this bishop. F5 indicates to me he wants to move his knight and play knight F4 later. King B8, always play king B8. Knight H3, C5. Now that his king is tucked away on B8, he wants to open up the position and attack white's king on D2. F6, never play F6. Queen F8, G5. The white's pawns look pretty menacing. Now, I know trying to learn is watching this video, and I must say, this looks a lot like one of Trying to Learn's games. He could have white or black. It looks like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who's going to win. I don't understand this position. Normally, at the very top level, you understand the games. Somebody's trying to get a slight advantage. Somebody's trading a bad piece for a good piece. Someone's making their king safe. And these games that we're looking at today from 15 and 16-year-old Gukesh, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if those pawns are strong on the king side. I don't know if the two bishops are going to have their say. Well, I don't know. Now, what I do know is this lecture is on Gukesh, so I'm going to bet on black. Okay, rook G8, trying to stop those pawns. King C2, running away to B1. Takes. Rook C8, King B1. Now it looks like both sides castled queenside illegally. Okay, perfect. Bishop takes A3. And in this position, white can take the bishop on A3, but he chose not to. He chose not to run. If you take on A3 and I play queen takes, you can imagine white didn't look very fondly on this position because my knight is active, my bishop, my rook, my queen, and I'm threatening rook takes C3. If you move your knight so I can't take it, That lets me play knight a4, threatening queen b2 mate. And you could see that white would be afraid here of getting checkmated. Now, not only is white afraid, but since white himself is 2,700, he's calculating. He's calculating like a madman. He must have calculated, I probably shouldn't take that bishop, but I don't have to. So he played knight b5, and he's like, I don't need your bishop. I have the open c file also. There you go. And this diagonal's open, so black might have to watch out not get checkmated himself. Queen f4 check. The bishop's attacked twice now. White's trying to fight for the c file. You can't play queen b4 because knight takes the bishop on a3. So Le Quang Lim said, no, knight b5 is better than taking. Okay, so he took that strong knight. Rook takes rook. Queen takes. You could take either bishop. He took this one, opposite colored bishops. And he didn't care, Le Quang Lim didn't care about the 2-to-1 majority that black has on the queen side. He thought, my 2-to-1 majority, that's the majority. That's the pawn that's going to promote, not this. So I don't even care that I'm a pawn down. As long as I don't get checkmated, I should win on the king side. It does look like white's winning on the king side, and black's doing well on the queen side. Okay, the bishop's attacked, so he saved it. Bishop d3, wants to play g6 at some point. And he does. Knight g5. So white's 2 pawns down, but he's going to play f7. He's going to take on h4. His knight's in a great place. And black doesn't really have any attack against the white king. Black doesn't want to spend the rest of the game defending against that pawn on f6, f7. So he plays queen a4. He's going to whip up a quick attack. Knight e6, wants to play f7. He wants f8 defended by his knight, so he can promote. Rook c8. Black has all of his pieces on the queen side. Queen d1. He says, I got an idea. Let's trade queens, and I'll promote my f6 pawn, and I'll stop your attack. So he says, no, we're not going to trade queens. Queen d7 threatening the knight. Queen g4. Knight c4. He's still attacking the white king. If it was black's move in this position, black could play knight d2 check, unleashing the rook on the c file, and then queen a4 mate. Black's actually threatening mate in 2 here. Knight d2 check, queen a4 mate. So he gets rid of the knight. Pawn takes. He wants to play c3 and open up that king more. Rook takes h4, defending his queen and winning a pawn. c3. Takes. Check. He doesn't take back because he doesn't want to leave the 8th rank open for white's rook. And he's interested in mating, not necessarily taking a pawn. So after all this craziness, materials equal, white still got this incredible passed pawn on f6, and black has a big attack. Queen check, always check. Rook e8, looks like the knight's finished. f7. Rook takes e6, king d2. So white sacrificed a piece because he was sort of forced to, but he still has his passed pawn on f7. Bishop on d6 is stopping it, so black should win. King c7 getting off the back rank. Rook h7 threatening to promote with discovered check. Check, check. Always repeat. Check, check. And in this position, after queen b1, white resigned. If you play king to the a file, rook a2 is mate. And if you play king to c4, which stops mate in 1, I have b5 check and queen b3 check and mate. And possibly I overlooked another mate. There's probably several mates. Just showing you the one that I saw. So after queen b1 check, white resigned. Now that was a crazy, wild game with both sides moving their kings a lot, and white queening his f-pawn, and black attacking on the queen side where the kings were. And that's the kind of game Gukesh wants. And if I'm correct, which probably I'm not, the internet people will be like, you're wrong. I'm an internet person. That was the game that put Gukesh over 2,700. And that's the way he likes it. He likes to play wild games, outplay his opponent, outcalculate his opponent, and get positions that are hard to understand. He doesn't want to play somebody who's easily playing the position. He wants to put pressure on both sides, and then hopefully his opponent messes up, not him. And he has confidence in himself that he can navigate these positions. Something that I used to have when I was young, but now I'm not young. But when I was younger, I thought like him too. I'll get a position, and I'm better than my opponent. And if it's tricky, I'll play well and he won't. That's the way I felt when I was younger. And now I feel like, now that I'm older, if it gets tricky, I'm going to fail. And I better think forever to make sure I don't miscalculate. But Gukesh, obviously a great calculator, great understanding of the position, understands king safety. And with black, instead of fighting for equality, like a lot of super GMs do with the Petrov and the Berlin, he fights for the advantage, like Fischer and Kasparov did when they were the best players. And don't forget it. Okay, last but not least, this game was also played about 10 days ago. This is against another prodigy, Norderbeck Abdusatorov, and he's a little older than Gukesh. He's probably about 19 now. He's become famous recently because he's always beating Magnus. But when I was coaching the World Youth for the US team, this guy was winning the World Under 10 and the World Under 12 and the World Under 14, sort of like Gukesh does. He's a little older than Gukesh, but you can see he's around 2,700 feet A2, and he's somebody that should be lectured on. Norderbeck Abdusatorov is not only a great name, but he's a great young talent. Okay, so Gukesh has black. This is round 1 of Biel this year. Okay, he plays the Sicilian, no Petrov, no Berlin, plays for a win with black, and he plays the most uncompromising, the Sveshnikov. Okay, and we saw this a lot a couple of years ago, or I guess there's 3 years ago, in the Caruana match with Magnus. Magnus was playing this with black, and we saw knight d5 in some games. And after you trade, you can play either knight e7 or knight b8. They're both tons of theory. He chose knight b8. I think that's a better move. Knight e7 blocks the bishop, forces black to play knight g6 later. Black plays on the queen's side. White plays on the king's side. Both players still in prep. White's winning on the queen's side. Black's winning on the king's side. But nobody can win right away. They're just going to win eventually. Kick the knight out. The knight goes to a3 because the knight wants to go to c4. Knight c4, a5, knight b6. Also, white wants to play c4, so knight c3 would block the c-pawn. So knight a3 is very common when you get your knight kicked. f4, here comes black. a5, bishop f5, c4. And these are the kinds of positions Magnus was going for when he played the match against Fabi. He didn't want to be slightly worse and try to equalize and then win with white. He wanted to get positions with black that he could win also. Knight d7. And here, this is just a matter of taste. Do you mind giving your opponent the queen side and giving him this big majority and all this space so you can get a king side attack? A lot of players with black would like to do that because they're playing for a win. They're not playing for a draw, which unfortunately a lot of the world's top players do when they have black. That's why I was very happy when certain people became 2,700, 2,800 because they didn't do that. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, I was a big fan of his before he was 2,700 because he played to win with both colors. He played very enterprising chess. He was really well prepared, wasn't afraid of anybody, and that's the kind of guy that I like to see get to the top. And a lot of those guys that are 2,600 to 2,700, they never get higher because they play a little too crazy. It's not controlled crazy, it's crazy crazy. But Gukesh plays a controlled crazy where he gets positions where you could win with black, but he's not playing badly. He's not just giving the game away, he's just making it double-edged. And that's an art, figuring out how to get winnable positions with black without giving away too much. And a lot of super GMs haven't figured that out. They're just trying to draw with black. And you know who I'm talking about. There's a lot of guys I could mention. Okay, so knight b1, setting up for the next game. He wants the knight on c3 or d2. It's done on a3, and then he can control the e4 square and b5 and defend his pawn on d5 when he pushes all of his pawns. A little slow. Knight c3, knight b5, knight a3, knight b1. I mean, if my opponent's doing that, I'm taking black. Okay, bishop f6. Bishop g4. He wants to trade the white squared bishops because black's bishop is behind all of these pawns. This is black's good bishop on f5. Take. Although again, a little slow. We've played like 15 moves and white's only moved his queen. Everything else on the back row. e4, attacking the rook on a1 by discovery. The rook saves itself. Bishop e5. And it looks like black has a serious attack. Black is actually doing something. I don't know about white's play on the queen side. And again, this is exactly what Magnus was going for in his match with Fabi. These kinds of positions. Knight d2, attacking the pawn. Knight f6, attacking and defending. Always retreat. Never play f3. Oh wait, black played f3, that's okay. Now that e-pawn is a goner, but black doesn't care. Black's trying to checkmate white. Black wants to open up white's king. So f3 is a very common idea. Sack a pawn, attack that king. And then obviously, knight h5. The knight wants to go to f4. The queen wants to go to h4. And if this was a blitz game, I would assume that black would win in like 3 moves. Because white has to defend perfect here to just not get checkmated. Black has all of his pieces attacking. The queen, the knight, the bishop, the rook is on the open file. The only piece not attacking is this rook on a8, but that's going to come into the game later. White's king is wide open. There's no pieces next to the white king. White needs pieces here in front of that white king. Okay, knight takes e4, queen h4 threatening mate, knight g3. I told you he'd get his other rook into the game, but you didn't believe me. So black sacrificed 2 pawns, but all of the play is on the king side where black's pieces are, and white played a5, b4, c4. What's that going to do for him? He needs, excuse me, to defend perfectly, beat off the attack, and win the endgame with his extra pawns. But he doesn't deserve to do that. These pieces aren't doing a good job defending. This king is open forever. We have a long-lasting attack. The white king's never going to be safe. Rook d1, maybe he wants his king to run out. Bishop f4. Now, some of you might say, well, wait a minute. Wait a second. I have a lot of discovered attacks. Bishop b2 attacking the queen. Bishop takes knight attacking the queen. Why didn't he do that? If bishop b2, the queen can take it. If bishop takes knight, we take back and our pawn's attacking the queen. Black doesn't want to trade queens. Okay? And what black wants to do is trade this bishop for this bishop. Once that dark squared bishop is gone on c1, knight f4 is coming, and that's the end. If the knight goes to f4 now, we're going to take it and get rid of it. So he wants to get rid of that bishop and play knight f4. Well, he's got to save his queen. The rook's attacking his queen. So he plays bishop e3. That way he could potentially take back with the pawn and stop knight f4. Rook f6, bringing the rook up. The rook can go to h6. Knight takes g3, and we crash through. Rook d4, pitting the bishop. Rook h6. So black has an attack. He sacrificed 2 pawns, but you can see that white's extra pawns don't matter. They're not like queening. They're not defending any key squares. Queen d2, that gets out of this pin. Attacks the bishop. g5. More fire, more flame goes in there. The bishop is defended, and black isn't in a hurry. Black's attack is long lasting. Black is always going to have an attack. He just has to bring more into it. Rook e4, let's trade rooks. Black says, let's trade rooks. If you take with the knight, you're giving up the h2 pawn. So he took with a pawn. Knight f6, we're unleashing the rook and the queen on h2, and the knight can go to g4, so it's really hard to defend the h2 pawn. Black is finally crashing through. King f1, takes, takes, takes. And we're still crashing through. We have knight g4, attacking everything. The white king is wide open. Queen h1 check. Everything is winning. Black's only down a pawn, and all of his pieces are attacking the wide open white king. Abdusattorov played king g1, stopping queen h1, and defending the h2 pawn. Knight g4, threatening h2, and the bishop on e3 needs to be defended also. Queen d3, you can have my h-pawn, let's trade queens. White wants to trade queens, then white's endgame is fine. Black's like, no, I don't think so. Queen e5, threatening the h-pawn again. Queen d4, let's trade queens. Queen f5, no. And not only am I threatening this now, rook h2, now my queen can come in on b1. Queen b1 is going to be lights out. So queen d3, let's trade queens. Always repeat. And they agree to it. No, they didn't agree to a draw. Always repeat. Knight takes e3, defending his queen. If you play queen takes queen, I take back, and black is up a piece. So he has to take the knight. Queen b1 check. Got to move your king. Got to go to g2. Got to protect h2. Queen c2 check. You can't play queen f2 because rook h2 is a simple tactic that wins. So you have to move your king somewhere else. You play king f1. Now, he says, take my pawn here, and I'm going to start perpetual checking you. Rook f6 check, king e1. If you play king g1, you get mated very quickly. That didn't take very long. Checkmate. You have to play king e1. And now here's a move you would all play. I'm going to pretend there's somebody here. None of them would play it. White's threatening queen e8 check and try to check a lot. So he checks and plays king f8. King f8 stops queen e8 check. Now white doesn't have counterplay. White wants to give perpetual check. Otherwise, white's king is just open forever. King f8, I really like that move. King c3, running away. Rook f1, there's no checks. Queen e2. g4, he wants to play rook f3 check. If the queen takes on g4, the queen and the rook will give mate. So he played king d4, thinking they were playing king of the hill. Terrible. Doesn't even know what game he's playing. Rook d1, have to go back to c3. If you go to the e file, king e3, then rook e1 wins the queen. Queen c1 check, it threatens the rook on a3. So you have to play king b3. You can't play queen c2 because queen takes, queen c2 because queen takes rook is check. And in this position, instead of moving, he resigned. This is very cute. If he plays king b3, we play rook to d2. You can't check here, you can't check here, can't check here. Your queen's attacked, and queen c2 is mate. So the only move I could find, was queen e4. That stops queen c2 mate and saves your queen. Seems good. And there's more than one way to win here, but this is the quickest. Rook b2, king a4 is the only legal move, queen d1, and the truth hurts. And white has to give all his pieces away and get mated. Okay, so all those games had one thing in common. After queen c1, he resigned. Gukesh was looking for a complicated game, a tricky position, double-edged, who's going to play better and calculate better, and he got those positions, and he won against 3 really strong players, and that was all this year, and he just turned 16, and he's outplaying 2,700 players. He's out-calculating them. He's getting the initiative with black. That's the kind of guy I want to see. And Gukesh is separating himself from the other top Indian talents like Praggnanandha and Sarin by winning against 2700s and by being 2700 himself. So Gukesh, the future of India is bright. In 3 to 5 years, when Anand's probably not playing anymore, the Indian Olympic team is going to look pretty good and pretty young. There's going to be teenagers and guys in their early 20s, and they're all going to be top 30 in the world. And Gukesh is going to be leading them. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. I want to thank our sponsor again, Wren Construction, W-R-E-N. Don't forget that name, it sounds like Ben. And we're going to bring more lectures to you in the future, here live on Zoom and in the future on YouTube. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.